All right, this is Building Query, April 23rd, 2021. Two main agenda items, one of which we've talked about as a team, which is talking about the O10.0 release and whatever you guys want to share with that. And I thought if you're comfortable, B5, we could talk a little bit about previewing the engineering help we're going to try and step up over the next short period of time. Again, I don't know how many people watch these videos, but that might be like a staple thing we talk about in like the Building Query call.
That's a really good point. Yeah, we should just lead with that. So we're hiring engineers, we're hiring front-end engineers, we're hiring, there's three really important roles we want to hire as quickly as possible. The first is the front end. So if you like React, TypeScript, and Redux, and open source, come hang out. Let's see what's going on with you. We would like to talk to you. It'd be great. And then if you are interested in cryptography, we're very interested in talking to you. If you are somebody who is very interested in authenticated data structures, in building verified data structures, which are authenticated data structures. Yeah, verification is a different word formally. But if you're really interested in public key infrastructure, come hang out. We want to talk to you. And then last but not least on the sort of first docket of set of folks we're going to be hiring is if you are interested in generic Go development, working on a peer-to-peer distributed system in core, we want to talk to you. Ideally, you've had a sort of more than 3 years of experience, are pretty pro with Go, you're very comfortable with the language, and you're excited to dig into an open source project that is sort of working on very bleeding edge stuff. Ideally, you have a passing interest in decentralization and or high performance data work. We will be posting these job postings, but this is the first place we're talking about it publicly. We'll put all of this up on our query.io/jobs in the coming days. Does that cover it?
Yeah,
there you go.
That's wonderful.
Awesome. Really excited to pick up some folks and like, I think Query is a good place to work. You should come hang out with us. Hopefully that's true. But yeah, and I think today, speaking of like early previews, today we're talking about the O10.0 release. And in this case, this is not the like very polished celebration of the features that are going into O10.0. This is much more of a temperature check on where we're at, a review on what's changed so that the team is aware of everything that's going into O10.0, and then laying out the roadmap for finishing and testing this release before it goes at the door. So before we get deep into that, Dustin, can I get a status update from you on, have you reviewed the Get stuff?
I've started on the review and still have some to go on it. So
Cool.
It is not finished, but that is what's on my plate.
Awesome.
Definitely be done today. So
cool. Yeah, and so just to give a feel for where we're at in our process, as a team, we've been working on this O10 release for a while, a number of months, and there is going to be a lot in it. And to that end, we're going to take at least a few days to test things out before we ship the thing for real. But we have the preliminary release notes, we know what's going to go in. And so I'd like to take some time to review that just so that everybody on this call is aware of it, and that we can make sure we sort of like aren't missing anything insanely major. Basically in the notes themselves of stuff that's changed, because a lot has changed. So with that, I have a couple of quick things I want to show, and then we can sort of jump into a sort of an enumerated discussion. But ideally we can have this done quick. I'm imagining 10 to 15 minutes. The most important thing that I think is really interesting here is, can I find the window? I did a quick sort of travel through time, looking at our different releases. And actually, let's just start with this chart, because that's not bearing the lead. So this is the orange line is the number of lines of Go code that are actually go into Query Core. And the blue line is lines of Go code that go into Query Core and all of its test suite. And so that's all of the testing code that sort of checks how query is doing. I wanted to investigate this when we looked into O10.0, because I think that there's an interesting story starting to form around query. Version 010 does introduce a new API and a bunch of new sort of feature seeming things, but it doesn't really have a ton of now we have diff, now we do blah. It's really not, we're not really looking to add many more things to query. Instead, what we're doing in this release and future releases is really polishing what exists and cleaning it into a much more stable, usable, high-performing product. And I think some of that is actually showing up if we look at this sort of trend in the lines of code being added, or more importantly, not being added as we add new stuff, as we progress through the releases. Moving from version 7 to what is the code, the release just before version 10, version 0.9.13, we had a big swell in terms of features. Many of those sort of patch releases added lots of stuff that we really thought belonged inside of Query as part of a sort of instant data stack offering. And so we saw this big swell. We really tried to like improve the testing of a lot of those components as they came in. But then this change from 0.9.13 to what will be 0.10, in terms of lines of code added to production, is very small in relation to some of our other recent major version changes. So like some of these are sort of much more sizable, particularly from 0.7 to the end of 0.9. And so I think it's just like a really interesting trend that I expect to see continue. I do not think that version 11, 0.11 of Query will be this massive explosion in terms of code complexity. If anything, I expect things to stay relatively level. And I think that the story that is emerging here is Query is actually turning into a much more mature product. We're done with the phase of like deciding what does and does not go in the box. And now we're refining the things that are in the box into more useful and sort of high performant things. And so that sort of brings me to the list of, I haven't even like remotely finished these release notes. But the biggest thing that is, and I apologize, like we're going to be looking at a markdown file here. First, let's take a quick scroll of all of the changes. These are all the bug fixes. These are the features. And these are performance improvements. Some of these, and like one line item is like, I worked for close to a month on this one single line item. And I'm not the only one. There are a number of us who have worked for a long time on individual pieces of these. So there is no sort of one-to-one relationship between the size. But to give you a feel for like a patch release, like that traditionally is the number of fixes and features that goes into a patch release. And so we've had a lot of new stuff added. But I think the biggest leading thing that goes into the 0.10 release is its performance improvement. The amount of memory the query consumes when running save is now bounded, which means that, which has the benefit of meaning that you can make data sets that are much, much larger. You can create versions that are much larger than they used to be. That's also coupled with much faster pushing and pulling over HTTP. We've overhauled the way that pushing and pulling works under the hood to not make many HTTP requests, but instead to make one really large streaming request that has a retry mechanism built into it. That's yielded us much better, much more stable transfers of data and better performance in terms of the actual pushing and pulling process. And we've also introduced the Raven chunker, which is a very low down thing in the stack that deduplicates your data, which means the query versions of query data sets take up less space than they used to. Which is a very exciting sort of transition. This is actually a very small code change, but is a massive performance improvement. I've seen a 10 gigabyte data set go from 30,000 blocks to 20,000 blocks. So that's almost a 1/3 size reduction in a version. Your performance will definitely vary based on the type of data that you're storing and how much repeated information is in that data. But these three things, when combined, mean that query save, push, pull, and storage are all across the board much, much, much better in terms of performance than they were before. And then the next really massive feature that we're introducing in 0.10 is this completely overhauled API. And again, on the performance side of things, query used to consume 3 ports. We had port 2503 by default, which served the API, port 2504 by default, which served our remote procedure call API, and 2505, which by default served our WebSocket API. Those are now all harmonized into a single port. Everything is on default port 2503, where we serve, and that comes thanks to us rewriting the entire RPC API to operate over HTTP, and completely overhauling the API itself both in terms of how it works and how it's generated. Which brings me to the last major point here is we've completely redesigned the way that lib works, particularly for the end user, to make it more consistent and to make the whole process a little easier to get at. So those are the biggies that I have right now. There are many other things in here, but as far as I'm concerned, the big change is the stuff that we have works a lot better and works a lot faster. And we have this new API that makes it much more consistent to interact with. So that's my spiel on what I think is coming in version 10. Anybody think there's anything I'm missing here that's like major? There's been a lot going around in these parts.
I feel like there's a bunch of small miscellaneous bug fixes, but nothing as large as the ones you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm trying to speak specifically in terms of like benefits that an end user would see.
Right.
There's also a whole category of stuff that is actually in version 10, but we're not going to talk about as features because they're kind of quietly being developed. Specifically support for multi-tenancy, so like having multiple user profiles in the same query repository. That's coming along. It's not there informally yet. Has step-based transform execution, which is actually prepared and ready in the current query master branch, but we're not promoting the use of that quite yet because we're still working on some of the rough edges of it. I'd mark it as experimental. There's some others, but a lot of those are sort of forward-looking features that we'll be refining into a much more usable sort of shape once the time comes. Anything else jump out? I think just looking through the features. There's a lot going on under the hood. I mean, the amount that we've refactored query is ridiculous. Like we've completely removed whole sections of the repo interface. We've like a lot of under the hood stuff that is making a lot of this sort of like cruft go away and allowing us to arrive at much more stable implementations of the kinds of behaviors that we want to see.
Yeah, it's 6 months of work, right?
Yeah, this one's big. I'm trying to think of what else is in here. Yeah, like I mean, maybe we could talk about the event bus, like the amount of like you now get like if you're pulling multiple things, you can actually see multiple things being pulled as a status, and you have a new WebSocket event API subscription that we can make. I haven't documented that properly, but
is the progress bar for pulling new? It's
not new, but it's overhauled so that if you are pulling multiple things, it can show you that, and if you're pushing multiple things, it can show you that. Just pretty off to the weeds. Like you would have to actually run query push with like multiple versions specified in multiple revisions. I don't think that's really worth standing on the mountaintops and screaming about, but there's lots here. There's a lot here. Okay, since anybody can't, you can't just be like put on the spot to think about how well the last 6 months of work went. I'd love to turn our attention to quickly round out sort of how we're going to get this out the door and pick a shipping date. I like to ship this next week, and the other thing I'd like to do is just basically use our current test suites as a benchmark for it. We also have our in development project Querymatic. I would like to make sure that we can get that code spike that currently runs to run Querymatic properly without any sort of hiccups or fails over the new API. But are there any other bits that we're missing? We have a milestone prep for a lot of this. There's a couple of outstanding pieces of work, but I'd like to dedicate at least 2 or 3 days to next week to testing this thing before we send it at the door. Does that feel right? Okay, so then I think the formal date we're going to commit to on air is Thursday of next week for release. Lovely. This is going to be fun. But yeah, I'm going to work up a formal set of notes. It's kind of all I wanted to chat about today. I just want to basically make sure that we hadn't missed anything major for the last 6 months, and sort of just look at. I'd like to, for the release notes, actually get some hard numbers on the performance improvements. But yeah, those are the high level takeaways. Anybody have any comments they'd like to add? Criticisms, foibles? No.
I don't think so.
Fun, easy, short. So, perfect. I think that covers it.
All right,
Thank you
gang.
so much, Ray.
See you next time around.
Bye-bye.
Woo. Bye.